When my daughter told me I wouldn't be welcome at her house for Christmas, I smiled, walked to my car, and made one phone call. By New Year's Eve, their mortgage payments were canceled and their perfect life was crumbling. But that was just the beginning of what I had planned. You won't believe what this 64-year-old grandmother did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Patterson, and I'm about to tell you how I went from being the family doormat to the woman who brought down an empire of lies with one calculated move. This is my story. I could make my famous apple pie this year, I said, settling into Sarah's expensive velvet couch, the one with the cinnamon lattice your father used to love so much. My daughter shifted uncomfortably beside me, her diamond wedding ring catching the light from their 12-foot Christmas tree. I should have known something was wrong by the way she couldn't look me in the eyes. Mom, unfortunately, you won't be welcome here for Christmas this year. The words hit me like a slap across the face. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. What do you mean I won't be welcome? Derek's parents are flying in from Boston, and they'd prefer if you weren't here. Her voice got smaller with each word, like she was shrinking into herself. I looked around that living room, at the silk curtains I'd paid for, at the marble coffee table I'd helped them buy, at the crown molding that had maxed out my credit cards. Every single thing in that house bore the fingerprints of my sacrifice. They'd prefer, I repeated slowly, and what exactly is wrong with me being here? Sarah finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something inside me. Shame. Not shame for what she was doing to me, but shame of me. It's just, you know how they are about traditions. They have their own way of celebrating, and it would just be easier if... Easier for who, Sarah? Through the kitchen archway, I could see that professional KitchenAid mixer she'd begged me for last year. $2,000 of my retirement money, sitting there collecting dust because her baking phase lasted exactly 3 weeks. Where am I supposed to spend Christmas then? Maybe you could visit Aunt Linda, or we could do something the weekend after. The weekend after, like Christmas, was just another appointment that could be rescheduled for their convenience. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting. At 64, I was getting too old to keep bending over backwards for people who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. I see, I said quietly. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. But I was already walking toward the door, past all those family photos where my face seemed to get smaller and more distant in each frame. My hand found the doorknob, cold and final under my palm. Tell Derek's parents, I said without turning round, that Margaret Patterson says Merry Christmas. The December air hit my face as I walked to my Honda, and behind me I heard Sarah call my name once, then the soft click of the door closing. Final. Absolute. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the Christmas lights twinkle in the windows of houses where I'd never be welcome. My phone buzzed, probably Sarah wanting to smooth things over with empty promises. I didn't answer. Instead, I drove home through the dark streets of Riverside, thinking about numbers. The numbers that had been bleeding me dry for 5 long years. $2,800. That's what I'd been sending them every month to cover their mortgage. For 5 years, while I ate canned soup for dinner, and wore the same 3 dresses, because I couldn't afford new clothes. $168,000. That's what it added up to. Not counting the down payment I'd given them from Robert's life insurance money. Not counting all the times I'd covered their utilities when Derek lost yet another job. When I got home, I pulled out my laptop and did something I should have done years ago. I calculated the real total of what I'd given them. $237,468. Nearly $250,000. More money than Robert and I had saved in our entire 40-year marriage. All of it poured into a house where I wasn't good enough to eat Christmas dinner. That's when I made my first phone call. First National Bank. This is Jennifer. How can I help you? I need to cancel an automatic transfer, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Certainly, ma'am. Account number? I gave her the numbers, and she pulled up my account. I see a monthly transfer of $2,800 to a Wells Fargo account. Is that the one you want to cancel? That's the one. Effective immediately. Done. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, I said, and for the first time in years, that word felt powerful. That's everything. I hung up and sat in the sudden quiet of my house. For the first time in 5 years, next month's budget would actually balance. For the first time since Robert died, I could afford to fix things around the house, buy decent groceries, maybe even take that trip to Ireland I'd been dreaming about. I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it to Robert's photo on the mantel. "Merry Christmas to me," I said out loud. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, Derek called. His voice had that familiar tone of barely controlled impatience that I'd learned to hate over the years. "Margaret, I need you to pick up my parents from the airport. Their flight gets in at 2 p.m. I nearly laughed out loud. Less than 24 hours after banning me from Christmas dinner, he expected me to play chauffeur for his precious parents. "Derek," I said sweetly, "did you forget about yesterday's conversation? Look, whatever that was about, we need to focus on practical matters. My parents need transportation, and you're asking me because that's what family does, Margaret. They help each other. Besides, let's be honest, you're not exactly busy, are you? Just get in your car and pick them up." There it was. The final insult wrapped in a command. "What airline?" I asked. "Delta. Flight 1247. Baggage claim carousel 4. And Margaret, wear something decent. They notice things like that." He hung up without even saying thank you. I looked at my phone, then at the clock. 10:47 a.m. Plenty of time. I made myself another cup of coffee, added extra sugar, and opened the newspaper to the crossword puzzle. At 2:15, when Derek's parents were probably standing at baggage claim, wondering where their ride was, I was settling into my favorite chair with a fresh cup of tea. My phone started buzzing around 2:30, Derek's name flashing over and over again. Then unknown numbers, probably his parents borrowing phones at the airport. I turned my phone off completely and spent the afternoon reading a novel I'd been wanting to finish for months. Amazing how peaceful the house felt when you weren't jumping every time the phone rang. The real fireworks started around 5 p.m. when all 3 of them showed up at my door. Derek's father, Charles Harrison, was red-faced and furious. "What the hell is wrong with you? We waited at that airport for 3 hours." His wife Patricia looked like she wanted to scratch my eyes out. "This is completely unacceptable behavior, Margaret, absolutely barbaric." Derek pushed past me into my living room. "You humiliated us. My parents had to take a $60 taxi because you decided to have some kind of breakdown. Get out of my house," I said quietly. They all stopped talking and stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Excuse me." Charles's face went from red to purple. "You don't get to make demands after what you pulled today." "This is my house," I repeated, stepping aside and holding the door open, "and I want you out, now." Patricia stepped forward with that condescending smile I'd learned to hate. "Margaret, you clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. My husband has connections throughout this city, important people who can make your life very difficult." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," Charles snarled. "You think you can treat people like us this way without consequences? You're about to learn exactly how wrong you are." They left, but Charles turned back at my threshold. "You'll regret this, old woman, I guarantee it." 3 days later, I found out what he meant. I was having my morning coffee when I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3 of the Riverside Review. The headline read, "Local woman abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm." They'd written a complete fabrication. According to the article, poor Charles and Patricia Harrison had been stranded for hours in dangerous weather conditions by their mentally unstable family member. They claimed there had been a winter storm warning when it had been 52 degrees and sunny. No mention of the Christmas dinner ban. No context about their demands or the $250,000 I'd given them. Just me, painted as a cruel old woman who'd snapped without reason. Charles had used his banking connections to plant the story. Very smart, very calculated. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Christmas dinner anymore. They'd declared war on my reputation, My dignity. Everything I'd built in this community over 40 years. Fine, if they wanted to play chess, I'd show them what a real strategist looked like. I spent the next week gathering evidence. Bank statements showing every payment I'd made. Screenshots of Sarah's Facebook posts bragging about our beautiful home and our amazing lifestyle. Photos of Derek's expensive toys, the boat, the motorcycle, the designer furniture, all purchased while I was covering their mortgage. I also discovered something interesting. Derek had been posting on LinkedIn about his successful real estate investments and financial independence. Meanwhile, his own mother-in-law was paying his bills. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold. According to Sarah's Facebook, they were hosting dinner for 12 people, family, friends, neighbors, all the important people in their social circle. People who deserved to know the truth. At 6:45 p.m., I loaded my briefcase with evidence packets and drove to their house. The windows glowed with warm light, expensive cars filling the driveway. Through the front window, I could see figures moving around the dining room. Perfect timing. I let myself in through the unlocked front door. They always bragged about how safe their neighborhood was, and walked into their dining room carrying my briefcase. 12 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to horror. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Sarah's wineglass froze halfway to her lips. Derek went pale. Charles and Patricia looked like they'd seen a ghost. "Margaret, this is completely inappropriate," Derek stammered. "You need to leave immediately." "Actually," I said, opening my briefcase, "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, this house, and this lifestyle you've been showing off." I started walking around the table, placing a packet of documents in front of each guest. Bank statements, mortgage records, 5 years of financial support totaling nearly $250,000. "Here's the evidence," I said conversationally. 5 years of mortgage payments, plus the down payment, renovations, furniture, everything you see around you. The room went silent except for the rustling of papers as 12 people examined the proof of my generosity and their deception. A woman in pearls looked up from a bank statement. "Sarah, why didn't you tell us about any of this?" "It's more complicated than it looks," Sarah said weakly. "Mom volunteered to help us." "Actually," I interrupted, pulling out the newspaper article. "Let's talk about what happened when I stopped volunteering." I placed copies of the hatchet job on the table, watching as the dinner guests recognized my photo from the story they'd probably all read. "Charles here used his banking connections to plant this story," I continued. "Notice how I'm portrayed as mentally unstable, abandoning elderly people in dangerous weather. The weather was 52 degrees and sunny, by the way." An older man in an expensive sweater looked up from the article. "Charles, what is this about?" "I was banned from Christmas dinner," I said before Charles could answer. "Because I wasn't good enough for their company. They told me my working class background would embarrass them in front of their educated friends." The woman in pearls stared at Charles and Patricia with disgust. "You took this woman's money for 5 years, then excluded her from family gatherings because of her social class." "He's twisting everything," Charles blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The bank statements don't lie," I said quietly. "Nearly $250,000 of my retirement money, gone. While they lived like royalty and treated me like hired help." The social dynamic in the room shifted like an earthquake. I could see it in their faces. The gradual realization that everything they'd believed about their generous hosts was built on lies. "This is unconscionable," the woman in pearls said, standing up. "Charles, how could you let your son take advantage of this woman's generosity, then attack her publicly when she finally said no?" More guests were standing now, gathering their coats and purses. The perfect Christmas dinner was falling apart before my eyes. "Everyone, please," Sarah tried desperately. "This is a family matter that's gotten out of hand." "No," I said firmly. "This stopped being a family matter when you made it public. When you decided my reputation was acceptable collateral damage for your pride." I closed my briefcase and straightened my coat. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll be paying for." As I walked toward the door, I could hear the eruption beginning behind me. Voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the sound of their carefully constructed facade crumbling. It was the most beautiful Christmas music I'd ever heard. 3 months later, the foreclosure notice arrived. Derek called me, crying, begging me to resume the mortgage payments. He'd lost everything: the house, his wife's respect, her parents' approval, their entire social circle. "I'm sorry, son," I told him, "but you made your choice. Now live with the consequences." Today, I'm sitting in my newly renovated kitchen, sipping good coffee, and planning my trip to Ireland. Sarah calls sometimes, usually when she needs money. I don't answer. At 64, I finally learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about respect, love, and wanting to be together. Everything else is just expensive theater, and I'm done buying tickets to shows where I'm not welcome on stage. The moral of my story: never mistake kindness for weakness, and never underestimate a grandmother who's finally had enough. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your generosity? Tell us your story.